Hello everyone. In this presentation, we're going to discuss that should a poor country spend money on space research or other high-tech research, or rather spend the same money on health and education. Often there is a criticism of governments, especially in the poor countries, on spending of money on space research or other advanced technological research. This is a criticism even in the rich world. People claim when there are so many other issues involved, such as poverty, people in need of good medical care, then isn't it cruel and incorrect to spend money on space research or other high-tech research? Shouldn't spending money on poverty alleviation, healthcare be the priority of the government? I would say, and we will see in this presentation, that in fact, that this criticism is not just wrong, rather it's economically incorrect. Or I would go to the extent that it's an economic disaster. Spending money on space research, other high-tech research is not just correct, but also prudent. Why? Let's find out. Before we start, we'll have a brief context of the modern monetary setup, where we'll discuss how money is created and grow in the economy. Under this system, let's see how money is created in the economy. A person goes to the bank to get some loan. Now the bank takes from the person a collateral, which can be an asset, inventory, and in lieu of that, the bank grants him a loan. And voila, money is created in the economy. Because as the name suggests in this system, credit is money. So remember, in this system, money is ultimately be created by the bank out of simply thin air. It's a fiat money. Deposits in the system are not needed really to create the loan. They are being created out of thin air. They are only needed to balance the books. And instead, it's the opposite. It's really the deposits are being formed because the credit is being created by the banks, not vice versa. For more details, check out the money presentation, and the link will be provided in the description. So we have discussed briefly, we have touched upon briefly on this, that in this system, government has monopoly over the money supply. It can simply print the money. How can it do that? Well, the government can run a fiscal deficit, which is the excess of expenditure over the revenue the government receives, and can issue debt. This debt can in turn be bought by the central banks, or in case of US, the Federal Reserve. And how the Fed will do that? Well, it will print money, and using that money, it will buy that debt, and that freshly printed money would go into the federal government's account, and that's it. Money has been indirectly printed by the US government. This process in modern day is also being called as QE, or quantitative easing. Also remember that the role of taxes in the system, where government has monopoly over tax collection, but under MMT, taxes are not the source of revenue. Rather, they are a tool to control demand and thus inflation. So what is the role of money for government, and how is it different for us from us in the system? Unlike us, for government, money has no store of value in this system. Why do I say that? Well, think about it. If you have something that is theoretically infinite and potentially you can have it at any time, would that thing have any value for you? Of course not. So for the government, money has no store of value, but it does have a measurement value. Like for us, it measures its wealth, taxes, etc. using money. It's like a scale, like we measure distance in kilometers and miles. Money also for the government has a medium of exchange value, wherein it can buy goods and services using money. And the third distinct thing from us that the money has for the government is it's a tool to allocate resources and transfer wealth. How? Well, through the taxes the government collects, it reduces demand from one person or sector as the government provides those tax money to someone else, it increases demand and income of another sector. Or the government, when it increases fiscal deficit and print it over, gets the money, handed out to other person, let's say spend on health and poverty alleviation, thus transferring wealth from one to another. So let's revisit the argument or the question again. Should a poor country spend money on space research or other high-tech research rather than on health and education? Well, the answer is it's a wrong question, as both type of expenditures can be done and should be done. The question comes, where is the money? Well, as we have seen, role of money in modern monetary system is very different for government versus household. Money is not a store of value for government. And doing this spending is just fine, is not just fine actually, but is the most prudent thing to do, as it improves the nation's human capital and its productivity. Again, where is the money source? Government, as you have seen, has a monopoly over money. Money has no store of value for government. So government can increase its deficit and simply print more money to fund this. So some people may ask, then what about inflation? This kind of deficit spending can result in inflation. I agree. Inflation is the limit wherein the government deficit spending reaches and beyond which it's not advisable for the government to do deficit spending. However, I would also ask that think about it. When does inflation occur? Inflation occurs when we are close to hitting the limit boundaries on the factors of production. Or in other words, if the resources in the economy are close to being optimally utilized and the supply side of the economy, of the domestic economy, is incapable of meeting the increased demand, that's when the inflation will occur. Not in every case. So let me explain. In this case 1, let's say there are 100 people making a road while only 50 are needed. This is disguised unemployment, is what we call it. There's a commercial building nearby and the contractor of that building is working to install some statues. Now to be fair, that work the contractor is doing may be aesthetically pleasing. However, it has very low economic value. However small the economic value is, the contractor approaches the road contractor and asks for 10 people. The road contractor is happy to give him 10 people. Because of that, road work is not affected at all, as in any case only 50 people were required, and the work in the building is also completed. Now, however small that economic value is, in sum total, the economy is better off because of this. Let's take another case. There are 100 people, but this time all the 100 people are required to make the road. And following the same schedule, the building contractor approaches the road contractor for 10 people. This time, the road contractor refuses. So in lieu of that, the building contractor says that he is ready to pay a higher wages to the laborers, let's say 1.5 times. So the overall price of the labor goes up because of it. And as a result of this, since some people have gone and worked on the building work contract with the building contractor, the road work is affected. And since the road has been delayed, the future productivity of the economy also declines. Inflation, as we've seen, has gone higher. And this is where inflation is hitting the economy, because we have hit those boundary limits, or we don't have slack to do this project. So you say, okay, let's say we can do both, but why doesn't the government do both in most of the cases? Well, the two states here. For rich countries, many a times the slack that is required, especially in labor, is not available. Also, the productivity of the labor is not increasing anymore to increase the slack, since the population is aging. Also, already the labor is at a higher productivity plane compared to the developing countries. For poor countries, you may ask, then why the poor countries could have a lot of slack in labor? Why doesn't the government spend money on healthcare and poverty alleviation and remove it, since it has monopoly over money and potentially infinite source supply of money? While agreeing with you that the government should not fuss too much about fiscal deficit and increase it, but it should be careful in spending and take smaller steps. Let's take an example. Let's say the government doubles its health outlay immediately. What will happen? You know, a technological marvel, let's say software, that can improve the productivity of the economy can be made in 1 or 2 years. A mega expressway can be constructed in 3 to 4 years. However, a doctor would take 30 years to make. Human capital takes a long time to develop, simply because of its biological nature. It's not an overnight job, and no amount of money can help beyond a point. So if we increase the health outlay, if we double the health outlay, immediately the limit boundaries would be hit, since there is very little slack in that sector. And so the healthcare costs will zoom across the country, across the economy, and this will hit the poor and middle class badly, which is quite opposite of what the government intended to do. Let's take another example. Supposing the same thing the government does with poverty alleviation. What happens then? Well, the inflation would zoom because there wouldn't be supply. You say, okay, maybe the supply can come in 1 or 2 years or 3 years. Well, some supply would definitely come in 3, 4 years. However, it would not be complete. Reason? Again, the bottleneck of human capital. Creating supply requires, especially away from the basic products, require skilled and knowledgeable workers, and that to build those will take time, and hence this will increase the overall inflation of the economy. And we have discussed this issue in greater detail in the inflation presentation. Do check that out and the link is given in the description. But just briefly, I will tell you that an overall inflation in the economy leads to only one thing, and that is wealth transfer from poor and middle class to asset owners who are generally rich. So let's summarize what we have discussed. Role of money in the modern monetary system is very different for the government versus household when compared to the old commodity-based monetary system. Today, a poor country, depending upon its supply constraints in the economy, can and should spend money both on space research and advanced research programs.
This spending will not stop it from spending equally on the poverty alleviation and healthcare programs. So now it's no longer a choice between spending on high-tech research or space programs or spending on poverty alleviation. A country can do both depending upon its supply constraints. In fact, doing so will not be correct and fine, but a more prudent thing to do, as it will improve the productivity levels of the country going forward and hence its future economic growth. Care, again as we discussed, has to be taken about the inflation level, as that is an indicator that will tell you about the malinvestments in the economy and the limits of the supply constraints of that country, or in other words, limits on the factors of production that the country has. And finally, taxes into today's system is not a tool to collect revenue for the government. Rather, it's an inflation control mechanism by controlling the demand and production management. Also, it is used to transfer wealth and maintain the government's monopoly over money in the economy.
So thank you very much for watching this presentation. I hope you like it. If you did, please do subscribe to this channel if you are interested in such content. Do like and comment if you have any queries. Thank you very much.